Go. All right, guys, welcome back to the Whiskey Shaman podcast. We have a special guest tonight. I say we have a special guest a lot, which is good because that means I'm getting special guests. But we have Alan Bishop here from Spirits of French Lick, and he's going to talk to us about how he got into the industry and kind of what he's all about with what he's doing. So without further ado, here's Alan.
Yeah, I don't know if you got a special guest, but you got a guest.
We'll take what we can get.
Sometimes that's half the battle with a podcast, So hey, no, my background, so I come from a little town in Pekin, Indiana, in southern Indiana, or as we call it, Hoosier occupied northern Kentucky. So for those who aren't familiar, Indiana should properly be split into two states. Anything north of Columbus you can give to Michigan, and then as far as I'm concerned, you can give Michigan to Canada. So they can all go that direction, and we'll go to the southern side. It's just two different cultures, but it's very, we have a lot more in common with people from both Eastern Kentucky and Central Kentucky than we do with people from the northern part of the state. Nothing against those people, just different cultures. Even culinarily, it's different cultures. But my family's all from Kentucky. They came here in the 1940s, out of Greensburg, Indiana on my dad's side, and out of Clay County, Kentucky in the 1960s from my mom's side. Both sides were somewhat tied into the moonshining tradition. My mom's family I've talked about a few times on different podcasts and stuff, but certain members of her family don't warrant giving any sort of legacy or credit to because they were not necessarily great people. But certainly one of them got ran out of Eastern Kentucky for moonshining, and had been busted so many times for it that at one point in time, the local sheriff basically said, next time we come out here, somebody is not going to jail. One of us will be dead when we leave. So that's how they ended up here.
Wow.
Nonetheless, my dad's side, and my mom's dad, his side, they were all, involved to some degree or the other, but mostly in tobacco farming and in moonshining on the side. So they bought this little 40-acre farm here in Pekin and started tobacco farming, and much to my grandmother's dismay, moonshining as well. And it was a way to pay property taxes and pay for Christmas, basically. So, sell a non-tax paid product in order to raise money to pay taxes. And then whatever's left, then you can use that for Christmas money, or if somebody had to go to the doctor or something, and somebody in the family was short on money. That's kind of where it came from.
Right.
So, and I don't tend to lean real heavily into the moonshine stuff in my family. In fact, we've never ever used it at Copper and Kings or at Spirits of French Lick for marketing in any way, shape, or form, because I haven't found it necessary. But I certainly remember growing up around stills, being 3 or 4 years old, and to me, it was like another tractor. It was another piece of farm equipment. It was another reason why we can't go do fun stuff on the weekends that I wanted to do. Right. Like, my dad, I don't know if I ever said this on a podcast or not, but, I don't think, short of once a year, because everybody in my family, my dad, my mom, my grandpa, and a bunch of other relatives, they all worked at Kimball's in Borden, Indiana, which is where my wife's family worked too. They would get tickets like in September to go to Holiday World.
Okay.
And I think until I was like 8 or 9, I don't remember ever going out of the county with my family other than to go to Holiday World like once a year. Like, it was a big deal to go a county south and go like to the mall. And the only reason we went to the mall was because he wanted to either go to the record store or to Radio Shack because he was a CB radio ham guy. So
that's cool. Yeah.
But we mostly did sugar shines, and we did a lot of fruit brandies. And the real reason we did the fruit brandies, not knowing the traditions of Indiana, because there's a huge fruit brandy tradition here, was because pretty much everybody had some kind of apple tree and or pear tree in their yard, and they didn't do anything with it, but they also didn't want to mow around it because of the bees. So that's just an excuse for being stung by every flying insect in the state of Indiana at some point in time. And being highly allergic to them as well. So that was a good time for me. Yeah. When I was about 15 years old, I got actually interested in distillation, for obvious reasons, not encouraging underage drinking in any way, shape, or form. But if you grow up in a rural community, you grow up anywhere, really. The more restrictive your parents are, the more you're likely to eventually lash out against that and find something. And my parents knew that I had that personality. So their theory always was they never hid anything from me. And if I was going to do anything, I was to do it at the house where they could at least keep an eye on me. So my dad and grandpa helped me build a little 10-gallon still built out of a stainless steel coffee dispenser from Fort Knox, Kentucky. I actually still have it. It's non-functional nowadays. It's
Right.
got the drain taken out of the bottom of it. And they basically gave me two rules. The first rule was don't blow your ass up in the backyard. And the second rule was bring us something that's worth drinking. And then they refused to tell me anything.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, literally, like they would not tell me how to do anything. Now I knew, the stuff that I'd helped them do in the past or seen them do,
Right.
but again, just simple sugar shine stuff, 1 pound of grain per gallon, 1 pound of sugar per gallon. They got a little diverse with that from time to time. It was mostly corn based, but sometimes if they had some rye or, being tobacco farmers, a lot of times we'd have some wheat on hand because we'd use wheat for cover crop in the
Oh,
wintertime.
okay.
So sometimes there'd be some wheat in there, whatever. I vaguely remember them using rye at one point in time, but to be honest with you, I don't know if they used rye or if they used ryegrass or if they even really knew that there was a difference between the two. I'm not
Right.
positive.
Right.
So that got me like somewhat interested in the art of distillation, not so much the art, but like, hey, I can make whiskey, right?
Right.
And it's funny because I have people that I was very, very close with growing up. I mean, very close with people that were at the house on a regular basis that they had no idea. Because as being, even 3, 4 years old, like that was a big thing. Like you don't tell anybody about any of this stuff. You
Right.
keep it quiet and keep it yourself. Then when I was in my 20s, I converted the old tobacco farm over into a produce farm. Not really organic, but we called it ecologically grown. So kind of doing the best you can with what you have. And my real interest was in plant breeding. And I was trying to breed open pollinated, sustainable varieties of vegetables and grains, basically, for the wider Ohio Valley. Because here in the Ohio Valley, obviously, we have heat, not like you have heat, but we
Right.
have crazy humidity and it
Yeah.
wipes out, there's all kinds of fungal diseases and everything else. Everything succumbs to something in the Ohio
Right.
Valley. And unfortunately, we'd lost a lot of the Native American varieties and early settler varieties were already gone. So, I made friends with a lot of the old timers and got what they had and then started filling gaps. Well, when you're doing the farmer's market in the middle of nowhere, everybody else and their brothers got a garden. So you can't sell anything. And if you're the first one in
Right.
the market, you can probably make a little bit of money, but guaranteed somebody else is going to pull up and just start giving away produce. When the money was good, it was good. I was running greenhouses and selling plants and raising produce in the wintertime, throughout the wintertime, running 2 wood stoves and these 24 by 48 greenhouses, which is about enough, cutting your own wood and splitting it and keeping them going all night. It's about enough to kill you in the first place.
Absolutely.
But when the money wasn't good, it was because there just wasn't any money,
Yeah.
So you start thinking, well, I've got all this stuff and nobody's buying it. And especially, I kind of back-ended into this is what happened. So what originally happened, I think I've maybe hinted this one other time ever that I know of, but not gone into detail. What happened was a former University of Kentucky professor knew that I was into plant breeding, and he knew that I'd bred some sweet corn varieties that were starting to get some popularity. And so he sent me some field corn called Tuxpanio. And Tuxpanio is this very hard flint corn from the Caribbean. And apparently he worked on this at the University of Kentucky all throughout the 1950s. He wanted to create it as a commodity crop that was open pollinated so farmers could reuse their seeds, but also because it was higher protein, so it was better for the animals, etc. And it just never happened. And he spent years developing it and it went nowhere. And shortly before he passed away, he sent me, I don't know, maybe a half pound of this seed. And honestly, when I first saw it, I was still distilling a little bit here and there on the side. And I thought, well, I'll just throw it in the ground. Nothing else will sell it for decorative. I didn't think much of it. And honestly, I didn't respect it the way that I should have.
Right.
Well, it just so happened that year I was working on another sweet corn project that I had about 3 acres of, and the deer and the raccoon just destroyed it. I mean, wiped it out completely.
Yep.
And this patch of Tuxpanio corn, which is up kind of behind and catty corner to my mom and dad's house, like if you looked for it, you could see it, but I didn't drive by it every day. I didn't walk by it every day or whatever. And I was kind of down because it'd been a bad year anyways. And I was kind of, when it was a bad year, I have to work at the gas station. Fuck it, that's a whole nother story.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyways, yeah. So I saw it up there and I saw that it was looking great. And so I watched it. Nothing messed with it, nothing ate it. How it didn't, why it didn't, I don't know. And it matured and it made a great harvest. And then I was like, you know what? I think I want to start playing around with breeding these field corns. And then that got me into turkeys and pigs, and how sustainable can you become, right? At the very least, if you can't make a lot of money, maybe you can feed yourself.
Right.
And very quickly that next year, after starting work on what is now Amanda Palmer, whose base was at Tuxpanio, and that was the inspiration behind it, that's when I started thinking, even if you breed a great open pollinated corn at that time, there was no real market for it. Like I couldn't even get the Amish to grow it, right? So what can you do with it?
Right.
Well, you could make moonshine out of it. And I was already selling wine out of the back of the truck at the farmer's market illegally. So
Yeah.
why not take the next step? So then by the time I'm in my late 20s, this has moved from like the little 10-gallon still and then not taking it real seriously to raising corn specifically for distillation, feeding spent mash to animals, selling moonshine at the farmer's market under the table. And it's moved on to 150-gallon still that was made out of an old milk stirrator tank.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a pretty legit, illegitimate operation.
Right. Right.
So my wife, my then girlfriend, fiance, basically said she got scared, and I don't blame her. She had every right to be scared. We would go to parties and stuff, and jars would come back around to me, and people would know where they came from when they shouldn't have. People that didn't know that I was doing that knew that I was doing it. And so
Right.
she basically told me, you're going to go get a job doing this or I'm out. And she was completely supportive. She wasn't trying to be, rude about it or anything. She was just
Right.
worried about it. So at the time, Indiana did not allow for small farm distilleries or artisan distilleries. There were only 2 distilleries in the state of Indiana, one of which was MGP. The other one was, no, 3, I take that back. One was MGP, the other was Huber's. They were only doing brandies and only on a very, very small, limited scale. And then Heartland Distillers. And it didn't look like the laws were going to be favorable for distillation for a long time in Indiana. So, and it was kind of moving through government at the time, but there was a specific senator who would shoot down every artisan bill that was put in front of him, and he'd call it the still on every hill bill, essentially. And even once it did pass, they basically put this caveat in there that you had to have your brewery license or your winery license for 3 years, and it has to have been active that whole 3 years. Their argument was that beer makers and winemakers had shown that they were responsible with alcohol, which really, kind of pissed me off during the summer study committee.
Yeah.
And my reaction to that was, okay, but I can go get a liquor license right now, and I don't have to have any experience whatsoever, and I can start a liquor store. So what you're really saying is, okay, sell everyone else's alcohol, just don't sell your own.
Yeah.
Which you can imagine how that went over at the time. So I started putting in applications. Luckily it was kind of catching the very beginnings of that craft distilling wave. I mean, it would, it'd been around for a couple of years, but very, very limited, So around 2013, I started putting in applications. Basically, anytime I saw a new distillery opening up in Louisville or around Louisville, I put in an application, and probably the world's worst resume that anyone has ever seen. I finally got a bite from Copper and Kings Brandy Company. Went in, interviewed with them. I don't have to necessarily comment on the people that they were, but
It's fine.
Yeah. So I got hired on nonetheless that year. And it was my foot in the door. I got hired on, not because they necessarily, I think, thought I was the best person for the job, but because I was certainly the cheapest person they were going to hire.
Yes.
And then from there, it's just like grab hold of it and run,
Yeah. That's crazy. That's a crazy start. So I'm going to kind of pause you right there. I want to hear more, believe me, but one of the things I wanted to ask you before we got too far into it is, it's kind of what I ask my guests most of the time is there a specific, and I know being a distiller for a distillery, it's a little bit different because you're sampling and, basically drinking the whiskey all day. Is there a specific bottle of whiskey that you're into right now, either commercial made or whatever?
I don't have anything I've been drinking on this week. I always end up falling back into, there's a couple things that I come back around to, and I've gotten very particular about what I drink in a lot of ways just because of being around distilling all the time. And so once you become a distiller, obviously it's very hard to sit down and just enjoy whiskey and not analyze the hell out of it. So I'll give you a couple of things that I really, really like that are just sort of trends that happen in life that, and they're all whiskeys that I can go to where either I don't have to think about them and I know
Okay.
exactly what I'm going to get,
Yes.
or I have to think very hard about them. So
Even
on
better.
the don't have to think about it side, my favorite go-to if I just want to drink and get a little buzz and I know that's going to be decent whiskey, not fantastic, but it's always going to be consistent, bottle to bottle, every single time. You know exactly what you're getting. The Sazerac rye.
Yep.
I love Sazerac rye.
It's good. It's good.
It is. There's nothing remarkable about it. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just good, simple rye whiskey, right?
Yep.
And so I like that a lot. The other one that is somewhat unremarkable, but also remarkable in the way that like no one has latched onto this and how they haven't. The hell if I know the way the market is. But Old Granddad bottled and bond.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I love
it. I love
yeah.
it.
Yeah. You know, my buddy DJ, he likes he buys Evan Williams bottled and bond. There's nothing wrong with it, but to me it's just it's caramel and vanilla and it just blows my head off as like it I don't know. I can't do it.
Super sweet. Super sweet.
I can do a couple drinks of it, but that's it. But Old Granddad has got enough backbone to it and enough spice to it that it reminds you that you're drinking something. And again, it's consistent all the time.
Yes,
although it will give you a hangover from hell. And then you figure out that OGD stands for oh goddamn.
Oh god,
the next morning.
Exactly.
The third one on that particular list would be the younger expressions of Lafroig. And I like those for the same reason I like Old Granddad. Big, bold, heavy, smack you in the face, like unashamed of what it is in any way, shape, or form. And I love that both those brands are rocking basically the same label or same variation on label that they have for 3 or 4 decades now, if not longer.
Exactly.
They're not trying to get your attention necessarily. They don't have to. They know who they are and what they do and who their drinker is. So the other two that I go back to quite often. So I love everything that Iron Root does.
Absolutely.
Specifically the Harbinger I really, really like. Although they've caused the Licorice Boys have caused me to lose more than a day or two of work over the years. And then Steve Beam from Limestone Branch Distillery was doing these limited 15-gallon barrel runs, single barrels for small accounts, basically. And they were mash bills that didn't get released in any other format. They got released as 375s from 15-gallon format barrels. And all of them were fantastic. But the one that was really, really great was one that was a 100% malted rye whiskey. And it's the best rye whiskey I've ever had, short of Leopold's 3-chamber, which I love too. But yeah, neither of those two are going to be for like a normal drinker. You know what I mean?
It's not bullet rye. It's not bullet rye.
Right. Exactly. But unfortunately that program got discontinued. So the problem with that bottle is that every time I get one of them, like it's just gone. Like you don't realize that you're drinking as much as you are until it's too late and it's gone and you're sad. So
that's awesome.
That's kind of I know that's kind of a long list.
No, it's perfect because there's like when I had Jesse from Still It on recently and he was like, well, I'm really into gin. And I'm like, yeah, no, I get that. But like, is there a specific whiskey? I know he's a Lafroig guy too. And I'm like, is there a special Lafroig that you like to go back to or something? He's all, I don't know. I drink so much all day. Like you're talking about, I drink so much all day that like, I don't really want anything. I just want something I don't have to think about. So I asked that. And so now I'm like, should I be asking that? Because like the people that I'm asking it are saying, well, but that was some good answers. So go ahead.
Throw another one in here because I don't know if it's still out there. And if it's out there and anybody hears this podcast and you can find a bottle, if I can find a way to get it from you, I'd love to have it. So the other one that was out there that was like my little glimmer of hope of like things that could happen with blended whiskeys in particular was a product that was called Alberta Rye Dark Batch. And it was basically I can't remember the percentages, but more or less half Old Granddad distillate. And then it was more or less half Alberta rye distillate. And then it was a very small percentage of red wine. And it was phenomenal. Just absolutely phenomenal. Another one that would lay you out with a hangover really bad.
I'm sure. Yeah.
But
so is that more like the I was talking to another guy and he said something about the Kansas City style of blending or rectification where they add it to port and stuff like that.
Yep.
But there's like 10% of it is that much. Jay Rieger out of Kansas City, I think, is doing that. And I've been trying to get my hands on a bottle of it because like that'd be cool to just have, as a comparison. But yeah,
some of the old school Maryland ryes were like that as
really?
well. And
Okay.
some of the stuff that was made at the rectifying plants in Illinois, that was one of the things that they did quite often as well.
That's cool. That's cool.
That's another thing I'll throw in there as a distiller. So, and I'm going to use it. I swear I'm going to use it. I might even trademark it tonight. Who knows?
Do it.
But
let's do it.
Why is no one? Everybody says rectified as though it's a horrible thing. And yes, there were horrible rectifiers, but a lot of distillers were rectifiers. Why is no one put the word craft in front of rectifier yet? We have craft distillers. Why is nobody proudly owning craft rectifier?
Yeah.
I mean,
that would be awesome. That would be awesome.
One of the issues with Copper and Kings was we bought in low wines from California, right? I'm sorry, you're not a distiller.
No.
Now we did ferment our own apple brandy. I don't know that they still do that. But I joked with them many times, you're not a craft distiller, you're a craft rectifier. Own it. Just own it. No one cares. It sounds cool.
and that's one of the things that I've been harping on with, and I'm sorry to all the listeners that I keep harping on this. It's like, just be freaking transparent in what you do.
Yes.
Just tell me what you're doing. I don't give a shit. I'll drink whatever you put out in front of me. Mm-hmm. Just tell me if it's made at MGP. Tell me it's made at MGP. Well, not even MGP. Indiana, we can pretty much get it unless it's from you guys. But like if it's some, and like with Japanese whiskey, they're horrible about this. And some of the Japanese people are trying, or the culture's trying to have some laws and put some stuff in place. But it's like, if I wanted to drink scotch, I'd go drink scotch. I'm trying to find a Japanese whiskey that's worth a damn. And every time I do, I'm like, this tastes like Glenlivet. Like, what the hell? So anyway, so where we left off, you had just started at Copper and Kings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I was there for right around 2 years. Myself and the other distiller there at the time who had no experience in distillation. He was a winemaker, and nothing wrong with that. On the fermentation side, he knew what he was doing, and he understood blending to a great degree. But he didn't understand distillation. The consultant that we had at that time, well, he's a great consultant, and he's now a Bourbon Hall of Famer. He had never worked at a pot still distillery, he had no clue how any of that was supposed to work. Everything was a constant uphill battle at that facility for me, including just the culture in general. And it is what it is. I knew pretty quickly that wasn't for me, but laid out the distillation protocols, figured out the boiler, figured out the cooling tower, figured out all the stuff I'd never done before because I basically had to. I didn't have any other choice. Figured out a lot of the blending and that sort of stuff. My babies there were basically the absinthe program. So the normal absinthe, as well as there were 3 vapor infused absinthe. So there was a lavender, a ginger, and a citrus. I don't know if they even still make those or not. They originally started off as like it was a project for certain bars that they buy a certain amount of product, and then you could offer them one of these, and then it turned into it went into distribution, but I don't know whatever happened to it. The apple brandy was shared between me and the other distiller. And then my other baby there was what they call Butchertown brandy, which was done as a one-off blend of our primary 3 grape varietals. Part of them that were aged 4 years in used bourbon barrels. So it's 3 used bourbon barrels, 1 New American Oak No. 2 Char medium plus toast barrel. And we did it for a charity event one time, and then that took off, and we did it as a high proof I think it was a 130 proof brandy. But I was watching Indiana basically because I wanted to get back on what I call the right side of the river, where I'm from, where I knew the history of and the background of, and what I wanted to lean into agriculturally. Because even though I'm a first generation Hoosier, my family, of course, being here now with my daughter 4 generations, but I'm the first generation born here. it'd be easy for me to lean into the moonshine thing, move to Kentucky and go do some stuff in Kentucky.
Yeah.
That's not hard. But Indiana doesn't have a Mike Veach or a Fred Minnick. So
Right.
Indiana presented a unique opportunity in that I not only just got to be a distiller, which I love, but I got to be a storyteller and a historian at the same time. I just needed a ship and a tall star to sail her by.
Yep.
Right. So, and I knew that Copper and Kings wasn't going to work. As a matter of fact, I was kind of freaking out. I was talking to Steve Beam and Lisa Wicker, who I met both of them before I ever got on at Copper and Kings, back when I was doing illicit stuff and hanging out with certain people from TV shows. And I was looking for something when I got the phone call from the Doty family to come over to what's now Spirits of French Lick for an interview, and went and interviewed with them. I think I was actually delivering Vidal Blanc grapes back from like Washington, Kentucky, back to the little winery there. I can't remember the name of the winery now. It's in central Kentucky, for Copper and Kings, because we would do one run every year of Vidal Blanc. Basically, it's a brandy grape that does grow in Kentucky fairly well. It was like maybe you'd get 150 gallons of wine to distill or something like that. So it wasn't much at all. Might have been more than that. I can't remember. But nonetheless, I got the call, and I'm pretty sure I said yes before they ever offered me any money or even really offered me a job. I was like, yeah, fuck this place. I'm out.
Yeah.
So couldn't get out of there quick enough. Took the job and started there in November 2015. Helped build out the distillery. Helped on the winery side a little bit until we started distilling in April 2016, and I've been there since then.
You were there on the ground floor. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Both places. I've been through 2 startups now, and it's listen, I like playing in the minor leagues.
Right.
I enjoy it because you get to do fun stuff.
Right.
But man, startups are hard, and they're a lot of work, and they're a lot of hours. And man, you couldn't talk about 2 places that are more different from one another. As far as Copper and Kings was 100% flash and circumstance and look shiny, coppery, squirrely stuff.
Yeah.
And Spirits of French Lick is the exact opposite, and doesn't have the marketing budget. So literally been on both sides of it. So
well, that's crazy. That's crazy. I know as on my dreaded day job, I'm a plumber, and I've done the plumbing here locally on a couple of distilleries, smaller distilleries, and the startup, being there with them as they're, we're turning the boilers on, we're turning all the cooling towers on and stuff like that, like getting them through that process. And one of them I was with all the way through bottling their first product, which was a gin, which was a nice gin. They got a base, from Canada, I think, and then they macerated everything and redistilled it, which great. And it's a super good gin. I'm not big on gin, but it's a super good gin. I was able to see that to fruition from the other side of it, not from laying hands on it, but being there while they're bottling and stuff, it's really cool to see. But I see all of the work that has to go into it. Like, you have to get label approval, you have to get bottle approval, you have to get all of these things that the consumer, when they pick up a glass and they drink it, they're not seeing why that bottle cost what it cost because of all the bullshit that had to go into to get it into that bottle.
All the money up front for equipment. And then, so the good thing is you hung out there and you saw how things work, which informs you towards, as a contractor towards, distilleries and how they work. So that's one of the big problems that I had. One of the huge problems I had. Copper and Kings wasn't so bad because you're in the middle of Louisville, Kentucky. Like, everybody who does anything in distilling, short of the group down around, Frankfort and Lexington. Yeah. Mostly Louisville centric. If I had a problem with a Vendome pot still, those guys were 2 blocks down the road. I'd call them, they'd be there in 5 minutes. Plumber supply was 5 minutes away. Whatever I needed was right there. All the contractors that worked at all the distilleries. You go an hour and 10 minutes northwest of Louisville, Kentucky, and you end up in Orange County, Indiana. You've got some, I'm going to say this up front, you've got some great contractors, very intelligent, very smart guys that have never dealt with a distillery and have no clue how to set it up. And so literally the first 4 or 5 months is just, how the hell do we get this to work? Just the boiler guy I can't understand. He comes in, I call him, I'm like, I got a boiler problem, and it's a different boiler than what I had at Copper and Kings. Here's what's going on. And he walks around and he looks at it, and I don't know. And his answer is always, well, small boilers don't like to be turned off. And I'm like, well, we don't run 24/7.
Yeah.
So
So sorry.
let's figure out something here, guy. And it's not their fault. They just never
No.
done it before.
No.
But that was a bit, that's going to be a big part of anyone's frustration if they want to start a distillery in a rural area or in an area without distilleries already. If you have to pay extra money for a contractor to come in from elsewhere that knows what they're doing when they're getting into a distillery, it is almost always going to be worth it to do it.
Absolutely.
And have them train the local guy. So A, they don't have to come back, and B, the local guy knows what the hell's going on when you call him. So
and that's one of the things I told this startup distillery, which they're good friends of ours. And I've been working for them for a long time, and they decided to do this. And he's doing some really cool stuff. He's doing some he got his still from Austria, and they actually have family that makes peach eau de vie in Austria, and that's really huge around my area as peaches. And so they're doing the same exact thing with the same still that he was running on it, because he had it, anyway. So they're doing really cool stuff. But I told him when he was doing all this, being that I've been in a lot of different distilleries and know about, I don't know the ins and outs, but I'm like, you need to upsize everything you have for double what you need, because that way it doesn't have to run at max capacity the entire time. Your chiller needs to be double, your boiler needs to be double. That way you can crank it down and it don't have to work its ass off, and then you can just go from there. And
you can expand as you need to without all the problems.
And luckily, I don't know why would people listen to me? Nobody listens to me, but they actually listened, and they got a bigger boiler and a bigger chiller. And now they're actually chilling their fermenters as well, which I'm like, that's awesome, because it's freaking, I think today was 101. It's the 18th day of over 100 degrees, with like 70% humidity. So, it's not horrible if you have the AC blowing right on you.
Right there. Yeah.
But yeah, it's when you're starting up like that, it's like there's so many things that you have to do to get it right, and you have to oversize everything so much that it's like, well, why are we doing that? We're so small. We're only trying to make, a couple pallets a year or something. Believe me, it's going to catch on. You're going to want to make more. And I think,
be smart and look at it like this too. The other, there is one other side to that as well. So if you're going to plan out a distillery, be smart about it. And I agree with you. Almost always it's worth oversizing. Mostly. So the danger zone is exactly where Spirits of French Lick is right now, and it's where Copper and Kings was before they got bought out by Constellation. They'll always exist as a brand now. If Constellation does nothing else with them but move cheap brandy using their label, they'll always exist as long as it's valuable to them as a label. Now, what merit that has, that's up to fans to decide. So I'm not judging them. But when you get to that mid-size craft distillery, is where things get scary, because all right, so probably, I guess what I'm trying to say is probably the owners of Spirits of French Lick should have stepped back and at some point in time and had a conversation in their head. Are we going to be real distillers, or are we going to be a winery that makes spirits?
Yeah.
And I don't think that they had that conversation at all. And I work for them, and they're good people, but I don't think that conversation was laid out initially.
Right.
In any way, shape, or form. And so now we're at the point where we can feed 15 states plus Canada plus maybe another couple markets if we want to. And it's no problem as long as you have the marketing budget and you have, feet on the ground salespeople. Neither of which we currently have, which is why I do so many podcasts and so much of that stuff. I used to do a lot of on the ground stuff, and you can't do all that stuff. There's no way one person can do it. I also don't own anything, so I, don't necessarily feel like that's my job all the time, and it shouldn't be. What they probably should have thought about was, instead of starting off at exactly mid-level craft distillery, is either pulling the trigger and getting another couple $1 million loaned to them and going big and hiring a salesman and putting, whatever loan that they needed or whatever, getting that money for a salary for salespeople and a sales team from the get-go, or pulled it back down to a couple 100 gallons and just made some liqueurs and stuff like that to go with their winery.
Right.
because it makes it much harder. And I think they would all admit this. It makes it much, much harder to navigate right now where they're at. Like, what's the next move? You're big enough that you can feed those markets and you can sell some commodity barrels if you want to.
Right.
And we do have some commodity barrels out there for anyone who's listening that might want some weird mash bills.
We might be talking in a minute.
Yeah, it's hard to figure out what their next step should be. And I myself, as the distiller that doesn't own anything, I don't always necessarily feel comfortable telling them what I think the next step should be. Right.
Right.
Because then I start to become emotionally invested in what that next step should be. And that leads to problems down the road. So
unless you're a vested member in the company, it's kind of not your business. As long as you still get your hours in the day, it's kind of like whatever y'all want to do.
Now, if you have a stupid idea, I'm going to tell you it's stupid.
Absolutely.
I will say that much. So, because I'm the one that's got his face out there everywhere, and so I'm the one that'll get I'm the one that, whether it's warranted or not, is getting the phone calls from the distributors when something goes wrong.
And that's the thing. Like, most people, and not to throw any shade at all, but like, most people haven't heard of Spirits of French Lick until you started talking about it, and that's, for one, is awesome for you, because you're promoting your own brand, which is great. And they give you the power, and we can talk about this, they give you the ability to kind of make whatever you want. But at the same time, like you said, if they had that marketing budget and could get it out there, like we were talking on another, I guess on the live stream or whatever, that I can't get spirits down here. I can't get Spirits of French Lick down here. It goes to Dallas and it stops, and then I got to get a mule or something to get it down here. Right. I'm hoping. I was talking to Justin Whaley, your apprentice, this morning. They had that benefit for his wife, and I won a bottle, so I'm hoping it's a bottle of Spirits of French Lick. so at least I could have one bottle.
Speaking of that, he's got to mail that out. Text me and remind me of that, and I'll make sure that maybe something a little extra gets in there for you.
I appreciate that.
Yeah,
this is an exclusive anyway, but it's just really, it's really cool that, like, even though you're not fully vested in the company, you don't have a share, and I don't know if you do or not, but you don't have a share in the company, but yet you're still promoting it because it's your product that's going out there. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so when I first went in there and I saw it, so I always joke with people a couple things here. So the first thing is that it's in an old Kimball's piano factory. It's not anything pretty to look at. We're a production facility, not a tourist facility. We do tours, but it's not set up to be pretty for tours, right?
Right.
It's a little grungy, it's a little dirty. When I walked into it, and even more so now, I joke with my wife all the time that it's my equivalent of the Black Pearl. It's just dirty enough and just ugly enough and just productive enough to be what I needed at that time, need at this time, etc. Right. The other part of it is, it's funny, like, because I feel like I've done, and I don't feel like I have, I know I've done so much, like, traveling for Spirits of French Lick, and I've done so much podcast stuff, and like, when I hear that somebody doesn't know about Spirits of French Lick, I'm like, how the fuck do you not know? Like, I don't know what else I could do. Like, we've been on Fred Minnick's top 100 for 3 years now. Like, and that stepped on the gas, and Steve Coombs has written about us, and Mike Veach, and still you're like, okay. So now my new joke is, like, I figured this out, and part of it is that it's what our market is limited to as well, and we should be further throughout Texas than what we are. I agree with you 1,000,000% on that, and Texas has been a huge supporter of us.
Absolutely.
So it's like the southern arc of states and up to the East Coast, somewhat into Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana was the latest adopter we had. I mean,
really?
In our home state, nobody gave a shit until other states started moving stuff, and then suddenly they cared. And then Canada loves us, which is kind of interesting.
Okay.
But it starts making you think culturally, like, why are these certain states as interested in what they are? And I think it has a lot to do with the distillation style that I have. I think there's some culinary things and some cultural things that sort of make sense. I don't know, the Canada thing, the only thing I can figure out is either Rush fans or Trailer Park Boys fans, maybe the combination of the two. And I'm completely okay with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
My joke is, as a distillery, we have a cult following is what we have. And I think myself, even as a distiller, and even on the the more home distilling centric side with doing, one piece at a time and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I think that that's what limits my audience size to some degree, and I'm okay with that. We're very much like the Evil Dead of craft distillers. Like you have to have seen it or know someone who's seen it to even know what the hell it is, and then even pretend like you like it. So
yeah. That's funny. That's funny that you say that because because I've talked to people multiple times, and actually I don't know if you know this YouTube channel or not. It's Bourbon Night. Put one of Spirits of French Slick's whiskeys in their top 60 whiskeys, which was
nice.
amazing.
I did not know that.
Yeah,
that's cool.
I don't know. It Wild Turkey Rare Breed won, but I mean it's a great whiskey, so I understand why. But yeah,
I stopped listening to the reviews and all that stuff a couple years ago because once we had a little bit of success, it felt good, and it felt like vindication. And the first time after you read somebody give you a bad review, whether it's justified or not, it's just soul crushing.
Yeah.
So now somebody reviews something, and I'm like, and Fred Minnick used to be the worst about it because Fred loves what we do, but he will bounce back and forth on certain things sometimes. And he would just fuck with me, dude. He'd be like, "Hey, you should watch the thing tonight because I reviewed your such and such." Hey, then he'd be like, "But I'm not going to tell you what I said about it." Ha 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 ha. And just sitting there, and every time Fred knows I feel this way about it too. Every time he'd say something when he's doing a blind tasting, and he'd give a tasting note that was one of my Spirits of French Lick tasting notes, but he'd say it in a negative way. I'd be like, before he says the name of the product, I'd be like, "This fucking guy doesn't know what he's talking about," and then it wouldn't be us, and I'd be like, "Oh, okay,
okay, yeah, no, you're right there,
right,
yeah."
So it's not healthy to get. You don't want to be in that game. That's no fun, and it's such a subjective. Thing.
It is, and I can tell you just in the little bit of work that I've done in the social media area, the trolls latch on so fast, and they want to get on there and they want to defame everything you're saying, and you're like, I'm not even saying that. What the hell are you talking about? And so it's got to be even worse when you're actually producing a product for somebody that they're taking to their house, and they're actually sitting with a bottle and being like, hey, and that's why when I do reviews on whiskeys and stuff like that, I don't bust balls unless they're not transparent, like we're talking about, unless they're not transparent. I might poke at them a little bit, but even what is that? Blue Note. You know that distillery. Anyway, so they're a Tennessee, Kentucky distillery, kind of doing a thing with another thing, and I said that, and then they tagged me in a post, and they were like, "Oh, thank you, but we don't add E150 to our whiskeys," and I'm like, I didn't say you did. What the? I don't care. I'm just like,
neither does any bourbon producer.
I'm like, you're not transparent. That's what I'm saying. You're not being transparent. Anyway, it's just really funny. So tell us a little bit about the offerings that you have at Spirits of French Lick. I know you're really big into absinthe, and that is something I've been tiptoeing around, and I've talked to I've told the listeners quite a few times about possibly doing a full podcast about absinthe, and I might have to get you back on to kind of push that a little bit.
Yeah.
But what are y'all making over there?
So when I started there, that was a part I forgot to add to the conversation a while ago. The owners at the time were the first generation, so John and Kim Doty, and Kim really wasn't involved other than the financing part of it, and she was involved more heavily on the wine side of it, but she didn't know anything about spirits. And they wanted to do a bunch of liqueurs and a bunch of moonshines and stuff. And I'm like, when I got there and I had the interview with them, I'm like, just tell you right now, that's not going to work for me. And they asked me why. And I said, well, because no one really cares about the moonshine thing. If you're a tourist trap, you can sell some moonshine. Yeah. Right. And if it's a unique, different, weird moonshine, you can probably sell some moonshine. Right. The liqueurs thing doesn't make sense. You run a sweet wine winery. Nothing wrong with sweet wine, Kool-Aid wine, whatever you want to call it. In the Midwest, you want to sell wine, that's what you're selling, for better or worse. Yeah. But do you want to continue to sell 3 bottles of that wine, sell the same volume that you currently have, or do you want them to trade those 3 bottles for a bottle of liqueur? I mean, you're taking money from one product and giving it to another one doesn't really make much sense. So
Right.
said, if you're going to do this and be as close to Louisville as what you are and as close to Kentucky as what you are, and having the history that we have here in Southern Indiana, we should focus on I laid it out as pillars basically. So there should be 4 pillars to the business as far as products. So bourbon, brandy, botanical spirits, and American whiskeys like rye whiskey and single malt whiskey.
Absolutely.
And then I followed that up with nothing added post distillation other than water and barrel. So I laid out rules for myself. They were more for myself than for anybody else. And bear in mind that these people knew nothing about distillation, had never messed with it, never brewed. They had made wine, but that's all they'd ever done. And then the other part of it was, trying to explain to them how craft distilling works. It's a lot like soccer. And this is one of the things I learned from Joe Herron at Copper and Kings. In soccer, you have big, slow guys and you have fast, small guys, and you don't have anybody in the middle. And craft distilling and distilling in general is like that. You have big, slow guys and you have small, fast guys. So it becomes a ready, fire, aim mentality. Mm-hmm. So not only were those 4 pillars there, but within those 4 pillars, we shouldn't be afraid to be doing all kinds of weird stuff, because we can find a market for it. And if we don't, we do it in such a small amount that it doesn't matter. Or if it's something really weird like aquavit, which goes through these phases of it catches on for a few months and it drops off and it catches on, it drops off. Who cares? Make a whole bunch at the very beginning. You've got it for years. It's fine. It's not going to go bad. It's not going to hurt anything. It doesn't cost that much to produce. So from there, then it was pick out a name for the distillery. So somebody had jokingly said something about like, oh, you should just call it something generic like Spirits of French Lick. And I'm like, nope, that's it right there, because I can play off the ghost thing.
Right.
And I can play off of the, not just the spirits in the bottle, but the spirits of the place thing. So now we're naming things after people from the local area and really leaning directly into the culture. Like whoever made that joke, I can't remember who it was, but thank you for making that joke because it worked perfect.
Yeah.
So then it was literally just a matter of laying out like the mash bills, figuring out different products and all that stuff. And so I knew the Lee Sinclair was going to be our flagship product at 60% corn, 17 wheat, 13 oats, and 10% caramel malt. I've been making some variation of that mash bill since I was 15 years old. The very first thing I did when Grandpa and Dad said, bring us something when it's worth drinking, is I thought to myself, I didn't know the history of oats and distillation. They have a very, very long history going back before Scotch and before Irish whiskey. That was one of the very first things that was made in the British Isles, was whiskey based on oat malt or oats in general. Back then, I didn't know that. I just knew oats were a grain that I'd never seen my grandpa and my dad use. And so that's where I started formulating that mash bill. And we actually did make 2 barrels of that at Copper and Kings that sold through the mic drop label for stupid prices up in New York at 7 years old.
Yep. Yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah. Supposed to be undisclosed. Too bad the guy that distilled it saw the label, guys. It's not that hard to figure out. Yeah. And they were dumb enough to put the mash bill on the label. Like nobody saw that label and said 60% corn, 17 wheat, 13 oats, and 10 malt. Huh. I seem to remember Buffalo Trace made a whiskey like that one time. No. That mash bill didn't exist until I did it.
Yeah, exactly.
So we knew that was going to be the flagship. I knew I wanted to do a wheated bourbon because I love wheated bourbons.
Absolutely.
Sinclair's a modified wheated bourbon, but I wanted to do a straight up wheated bourbon. What else in there was the initial things? There were some ideas that the owner had. That I wanted to do a rye whiskey. I knew I wanted that rye whiskey not to be a Kentucky barely legal, which is 51 rye. Right. I also don't like 95.5 in general, so I didn't want to do that. But I did like the George Washington mash bill. So we leaned into that and we switched out for brewer's malts. We do that with a lot of the stuff. We switch out for brewer's malts. I knew that I had the Amanda Palmer corn that I could play with. So we immediately started growing that in year 2, and putting down barrels of what's now called Hindostan Falls. The owner's idea is, so he wanted to do a buckwheat bourbon. And at the time, I think only Koval and Corsair had anything with buckwheat in them.
Yep.
Not knocking them, but I wasn't a fan of either of those 2 products.
Not great.
And to follow that up, I laid out the mash bill for it because he didn't know how to lay out a mash bill. We distilled it, and I thought it was trash coming off the still. I still think it's trash. I don't like it out of the barrel either, but it caught on, and we sell the shit out of it. Of course, the one thing that I don't like, the bourbon snobs like. That's like the one thing that, like, you get a hardcore bourbon drinker, I can sell them buckwheat bourbon all day long.
Right.
It's stupid, and I hate it. but I hate it because of particular memories associated with the flavor. So we
Right.
toast some of the buckwheat and it comes off almost like stout beer. And so it goes
Okay.
like peanut butter and chocolate. And so it reminds me of Reese's Pieces.
Hmm.
Every time I smell it and every time I taste it, I have this memory of being 5 years old and I was sick. I was in the back of my mom's car and she gave me Reese's Pieces and I threw up.
Yeah.
And I just,
Not good.
I'm
Not good.
honest with people about it though. Like if we're
Yeah.
doing a single barrel tasting, I'm like, listen, I'm not going to do you any good on tasting notes on this because I don't like it.
Don't.
I hate it.
Just don't. It might be
Right.
great for you. Just don't.
Yes.
Just
Yeah.
don't.
You can feel free to tell me what you think about it, and I'll just take your word for it because I don't like it.
And that's something that we had talked about in a previous podcast, about going back to like what you taste is so subjective because what you're tasting is a memory of
Yes.
something that
Yeah.
happened. So it's like it's so difficult for me to tell somebody a tasting note, well, this tastes like this. No, it doesn't, because that guy's not going to taste that. Yes, you get the basic notes. It's caramel, vanilla, whatever, all that. That's fine. But like, this smells like my grandma's attic. I don't know what the hell your grandma's attic smells like, or this smells.
Man, it's so
this,
funny that you use that one in particular. So weeded bourbon, if the weed is forward, a lot of times it can come off to some people as musty.
Yep.
It's not musty. That's what wheat brand
That's
smells
what
like.
wheat-
It's
Yep.
yeah. Yeah.
And
I had
so,
that conversation with Justin recently about William Dalton. He's like, smell this. He's like, it smells off. I'm like, nope, that was our farm grown wheat right there, is what that was. There was nothing wrong with it. That's what it does sometimes, man.
my marker for wheat now, at my last sommelier class, one of the instructors, he's the, I don't know what he does, but he's a big guy in the Old Riley distillery in North or South Carolina, one of the two. Anyway, and he said they did a wheat whiskey, and every time he went to even the new make or a 4-year-old age, he goes, he got the taste of Whoppers or malt balls in his mouth. And I was like, when I tried whatever wheated whiskey we were drinking, I was like, oh my God, there it is. You know what I mean? And it just snapped. And now every time I have a wheated, I'm like, yep, that's which I love. I love those. And so at least it's not a negative thing like the Reese's Pieces, but so yeah, it's funny how that can send you to that. So sorry, we got off on a tangent. Continue.
Oh, it's all good. All good. The other idea he had, he wanted to do a multi-grain bourbon, which he should have known that like TTB's never going to sign off on anything called multi-grain because it sounds like a health statement, right?
Yeah.
It would have been a terrible name. He had a lot of those like just terrible name ideas. I'm like, don't, nope, you're not associating my name. Like, I don't own anything, but I have certain rules and standards that I stick to, and I'll stick up for myself. So that became Lost River, and it was shit. It's 7 grains.
Oh my God.
Man, that one is incredibly hard. It was incredibly hard to tune that mash bill, and it was incredibly hard to. How do you not make it just taste like mud? You know what I mean? And so we still struggle with that with like a lot of our bourbons, honestly, they show best at 4 years, and then year 5, they're terrible. And then year 6, they're really good. It's a weird thing. Rye whiskey seems to show best at year 2 and year 5 for whatever reason. I haven't figured that out yet. This multigrain, until it's 5 years old, it's not worth looking at. It's not worth touching. It's not worth looking at. So we laid that one out, and we did 2 versions. That one we haven't released yet. One I have set back for hopefully the 10-year anniversary of Spirits of French Lick. And it was the same as the multigrain whiskey, the Lost River, except that instead of using citric acid to sour it, we use malolactic bacteria. So we don't do any sour mashing. We've only done it once for high carotenoid corn in order to get more of the free amino acids out of it. We either sour with malolactic bacteria or with citric acid. So the other one was done with malolactic bacteria, and then it was left at high proof, like 135, and went into 40 or so different used barrels for a Solaris system. So, hopefully, like I said, the first release of that will be, during the 10-year anniversary. It's 7 years old now. So, and it's showing fairly nice right now. So, we might sneak a barrel of it out somewhere. We'll see. I don't know. If I do, I'm going to leave it at hazmat. So,
absolutely, I would.
And then other than that, I'm obsessive about absinthe. but also at that time in the Midwest, and I learned my lesson at Copper and Kings. So at Copper and Kings, we went, absinthe is one of those things that America lost its palate for a very long time because they weren't exposed to it, right? Americans aren't good with, they're still iffy about bitter stuff. Some of them are still iffy about what they perceive as licorice flavor. So at Copper and Kings, we went much more like candy sort of flavor. So we did a lot of star anise, and we did a brandy base, and not just any brandy. We did muscat grape for that, which is very perfumey anyway.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it worked great, especially because it wasn't like a traditional absinthe, right?
Right.
It was a little more palatable to, I think, a lot, especially younger people. So we kind of did the same thing at Spirits of French Lick, and that we did a traditional Swiss Blanche is what we did, but we did probably, it's kind of a modification between 3 different absinthe recipes that I was familiar with. And we kind of pulled it back a little bit to lighten it up some, because I realized at Copper and Kings, one thing that I found funny was people that said they didn't like absinthe because they didn't like licorice. Also seemed to be the same people I knew for a fact like root beer, because root beer and absinthe have a lot of the same flavor compounds.
They do.
So when you pull the absinthe back a little bit, it makes it easier from an educational standpoint. If someone's not familiar with absinthe, they want to get to know it, and they want to move past that, oh, it tastes like licorice thing, quote unquote. You can drop it into a highball with some root beer. Typically A&W works best. Bargs is okay, but it's a little too spicy a lot of times. And do a root beer float basically with absinthe, or a highball with root beer, or you can do a root beer float. We've done that with ice cream before.
I bet that's pretty good too.
It is. And so we made it a little lighter style of absinthe to get people involved. Now, if I had that to do over again, I would go full on 100% like traditional, either Swiss Blanche or Northern France style, very, very heavy, but the market wasn't there at that time. Now I think the market has come along to say, you're not ever going to sell a ton of it, but you definitely can sell some. And the guys that are in the absinthe are way more snobby than any of the guys that were ever into bourbon have ever been.
You're right.
And so I'm, guaranteed when I get around to doing something like that, it's going to piss them off, because I've already done some. I did some for Key West Trading Company. I did the Death in the Afternoon, which they seem to be okay with, but there's a purple absinthe coming because I Americanized it by throwing some Peruvian purple corn, maize morado in order to color it purple. There's various other things happening there too. Anyways, long short of it, we did the absinthe. I wanted to do an aquavit because I never got to do an aquavit at Copper and Kings. And I thought, well, you walk into a liquor store and you look at like botanical spirits, gin's got this huge aisle, right? And there's 100 different gins. Well, you got to knock one of those off the shelf and then get yours on the shelf and then hope nobody knocks yours off. You go into a really nice liquor store, maybe they have 2 aquavits. They can fit an aquavit in down there. And the easy sell for it is French Lick is the home of canned commercial tomato juice. So the Bloody Mary aquavit just made sense. And why we haven't started canning that as a canned cocktail, I don't know, but I'm putting that out into the universe.
That needs to happen.
Yeah, especially one of the old vintage like French Lick tomato juice like labels on it or something like that, or something inspired by that would be cool.
I love a good Bloody Mary. So that's
We've done some other various different things. We do an Old Tom gin, which I really, really like. We do some 100% oat whiskey. There was a while there where I think I had in my mind that like maybe I was going to do some component whiskey. So I did like a few barrels of 100% oat whiskey, 100% rye whiskey with like a bunch of different rye malts in it. I did we've got a corn whiskey that we're getting ready to release as a bulk product. It's 90% just yellow number 2 dent corn and 10% chocolate malt. And you can't taste the corn at all. It's just straight chocolate.
The chocolate just takes over. Yeah.
And that was entirely the purpose. Cause like what, if you're a craft distiller, you're defined as one of 2 things. You're either on premise or off premise. And thank God before COVID hit, we've always been an off premise brand because our prices were too high for most bars to put us in the well. But when we had our sales guy at the time, he's like, you need to come up with something that we can put in the well, something cheap. And I'm like, all right, well, what's a category that you could do that with? Corn whiskey. Because what is there short of, mainline, basically mellow corn is all there is. Yeah. And you don't want to reproduce that because there's no money in it.
Nope.
But what could a bartender use? Something that tastes like chocolate for sure.
Yep, absolutely.
So we went that direction with that. It's actually really hard kind of sometimes to think through. To think through like what all we have, but apple brandy is the other big part of it. I am a huge fan of apple brandy. Apple brandy and absinthe, they're kind of my go-to things.
Yep.
If I won the lottery, I'd for sure launch an apple brandy brand. Not just distilling it. I'd be buying barrels from apple brandy producers, not only in the United States, all over the world, and I'd be doing crazy ass blending with it. Because I think there's a gap in the market there, and I think apple brandy is the one brandy that can stand up next to bourbon. You're not going to flip a bourbon drinker, but you can get them to buy a few bottles of it for sure.
You can.
So we focus on Hoosier style apple brandy because that's kind of the history of the region we're from in southern Indiana, a 6-county region called the Black Forest, Washington, Orange, Lawrence, Crawford, Harrison, Perry County. By the mid 1850s, basically each of those 6 counties had upwards of 150,000 apple trees per county that were used specifically for apple brandy production, not named varieties. They were grown from seed year to year, just like you see in Calvados. Between 1858 and 1914, there were 150 plus legal operating distilleries making apple brandy in that 6-county region. It was considered the highest quality apple brandy you could get in the world. We even have records of it being exported to Normandy, which is hilarious to me. That means the local French people weren't drinking their Calvados. They were drinking our Hoosier style apple brandy. So it's our apple brandy in the style that we make, in the traditional Hoosier style that we make to the best ability that we can. It's much more kind of joke that it's like bourbon's sexier older sister, right?
Okay.
It's very similar to bourbon. You're gonna have a very similar experience to bourbon, but you're gonna have those notes of like stewed apples, those notes of apple crisp, those notes of baked apple pie.
I'm sold.
Sometimes a little cinnamon characteristic as well. And so the new thing now is, again, you end up painting yourself in these weird corners because I have rules. So bourbons all go in at low entry proof, 105.
Oh wow.
Brandies all go in at still proof. So the apple brandy goes in at 135. And the idea there is that you're trying to hold on to as much of that apple as you can. You want some barrel in there, but you want that apple to hold up to that barrel. You drop the apple brandy to a lower proof and that barrel is going to overwhelm it.
Right.
So strangely enough, this turns into a thing. And what happens is we do a lot of single barrels. And I jokingly, because I love putting apple brandy in front of people, I would jokingly at the like doing a single barrel pick. We're coming up on lunch. Everybody's feeling a little tipsy or whatever. Be like, let's get into an apple brandy barrel, right? Just going to go ahead and send them over the edge. Just go ahead and get them good and plastered before they go to lunch. Because it goes in at 135, and in that particular warehouse, we raise proof. So it'll come out in 140, 142, whatever. But it doesn't drink like that.
No.
So we have this group in there. I drill this barrel. It was an apple brandy fully matured in a tequila cask. So it had never touched new oak ever, not once. It was a once used French oak red wine barrel that then went to Mexico and had tequila in it, and then came to us and we put apple brandy in it. It was in there for 3 years. We pull it. They decide they like it. They want a half barrel of it, but they want it at hazmat. And I'm like, we just sold a half barrel of hazmat apple brandy. What the hell is that? Like that's not a thing.
Yeah.
So we sell that and we're like, well, we'll put the other half in our tasting room just as a joke. Cause it's like 141.2 or so. It was way up there.
Yeah.
It was gone in 48 hours.
Shut up.
And so now we have this new thing happening where people are buying hazmat apple brandy single barrels from us. And we've probably sold 10 or 11 of them. In fact, I was talking to Fred Minnick the other day. He brought up how much he loves our apple brandy. He may be doing a single barrel pick of hazmat apple brandy, which would totally help make it a thing, like a real thing that people recognize. But and then we do variations on stuff. I do some barrel finishing and stuff. I'm very particular about the barrels that we use. We did one time, I'll admit to this now because they're pretty much gone. We did at one point in time do like 4 gimmick barrels. And what I mean by gimmick barrels is, so when I get a finishing barrel in, I want it empty and I want it dry. The only flavor of what was in there I want before is either whatever aroma was left or whatever little bit of liquid was in the wood. Right? You shouldn't ever be throwing a bourbon or a rye into something that just takes over the flavor profile of it. And still, if you want to call it a DSS, distilled spirit specialty, go for it. That's fine. Nobody. Right. But I see no difference between if you get a red wine barrel and it's got still got 2 gallons of wine in it and you put whiskey in it, you might as well just went into a new oak barrel and thrown some wine into the barrel.
Yep.
It's the same difference to me.
Yep.
So we did do 4 gimmick barrels one time because somebody had them. And it was 2 Curacao barrels, which one of those turned out okay. The other one's whatever. And then we did a a cinnamon vanilla whiskey barrel,
Oh,
and a
God.
vanilla barrel. And we sold the shit out of them. Don't get me wrong. They
Oh.
were easy sells, but I hated them. I hated them. And I will never, ever, ever do that again at Spirits of French Licks. So, but,
Yeah,
you know, it is what it
that's
is. That's the closest we've ever come to breaking my rules. So,
right. Right. And what's funny is like, people think that when you get like a finished whiskey, that there is some of that port or whatever. And I know there's legalities with all this, and most people don't follow them because if you dump the barrel, if you set it up right and let it sit for a minute, it'll leach out more and you can dump it a little more. But and I think a lot of distilleries, especially some of the Scotch ones with their port and sherry finishes, they like that extra, which is fine because it's going to be sitting in there for 15 years. It's fine.
right.
But that's one thing that a lot of people don't understand is like sometimes that can take over because I know Garrison Brothers here, which is about 30 minutes away from me, they did a honey finished. And so what they did, instead of filling the barrel with honey, because it had to be a bourbon, right? They took they did something with the honey and they like infused it into the wood. And so like it was a dry barrel, but they infused the honey, like baked it in there or something like that. And I will tell you, I'm not, the listeners will know that I'm not a huge fan of Garrison. It's growing on me. It's a very tannic bourbon. It's very harsh to drink. It's a cowboy bourbon. So, say that for what it is. But they offered it at 40%, and then it was honey finished. So that was nothing but candy. It was just a candied whiskey, which it was fine. I actually bought a bottle for my sister-in-law's wedding. I was like, this will be fun. Everybody could have some, and everybody loved it. And it was great, and it went well. But it's like there's a difference between finishing and rectifying, like we were talking about.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, and here's the thing too. So I'm not opposed to doing any of those things, like you said, as long as they're transparent. I would never do it at Spirits of French Lick. That's not what. That's not what Spirits of French Lick started out as. That's not what it stands for. That's not what it does. That's not to say that if I didn't work somewhere else, listen, if it were up to me, everything I fucking do would be in the distilled spirit specialty category, man.
Right.
Everything.
Right.
Give me just 1 second here.
No problem. Sorry. Getting a refill. You got to get a refill.
Yeah. Thank you, by the way. Yeah, I like playing in the weird spaces is what I really like to do. And honestly, the bourbon playground is a playground full of bullies is what it is. And I'm not trying to be mean. I'm not, and listen, I am thankful for all the fans that we have and all the support that we have. I'm bored with bourbon, tired of it, tired of hearing about it, tired of talking about it, tired of every time you turn around, there's a new great big giant megalith distillery coming and nobody thinks that bubble is going to burst. You're wrong. It has happened in the past. It happened with the Whiskey Trust.
Yep.
It's going to happen again. They're either going to buy you out to put you out of business for less than what you're worth, or they're going to run you out of the market when they can't sell it into these foreign markets that do not have the population growth to continue it. There is not the population growth in Asia anywhere short of India to continue the growth pattern that they have planned for. And how no one sitting in a CEO's chair has sat back and been like, why are we putting in X amount of warehouses a year? Why are we making X amount of barrels a year? It's stupid. And listen, it won't happen this time the way it did last time. We're not going to go into prohibition, although there is a growing temperance movement. If no one has noticed, it's out there. What you're going to see is the distilleries that can do well now are not going to be those danger zone Spirits of French Lick areas.
Right.
They're going to be, and they're not going to be the huge new Bardstown bourbons. They're established enough. They're going to be okay. It's going to be the small craft distillers that can be edgy, that can be regional, and it can create cult followings where people have to travel to them and or it has to be shipped to them that do the weird stuff. Because listen, 10 years ago, people told, well, not even that, 8 years ago when I left Copper and Kings, last thing Joe Heron said to me is, none of this cool stuff happened in Indiana. It all happened in fucking Kentucky, and nobody cares about donkey shit whiskey in the first place. I have no problem quoting him fucking saying that. and nobody's going to care about your weird bourbon mash bills. I made him care about those weird bourbon mash bills, and it did just fine. So
Right.
to this day, he can still, go fuck himself for whatever
Yep.
that's worth.
Yep.
And I would say it
Absolutely.
to his face, and he knows it. So, there's room for those things. You just have to be able to educate people, and you have to be able to put it in front of them in an interesting way. And the one thing that still has not happened with whiskey yet, we have it in certain places. Iron Root Republic is on the edge of it. I think with my style of distillation, I'm on the edge of it. No one has yet mastered the farmer's market plan. And what I mean by that is playing into the true culinary heritage of the place where your distillery is at.
Yep.
That's the next step.
Yep.
That's the next step. And big guys can't do that.
So. And I will tell you, the last podcast I did was with a guy, and he's all about American single malt. And I feel, and we talked about that American single malt is now, it's never going to replace bourbon, because bourbon is obviously America's whiskey, and that's fine. But American single malt and all these, I say craft, they're huge distilleries like Stranahan's and Chalnua and all those, Westland and all those. They're making some amazing product. They're not using as much wood because they're using used oak. All of the things that they're doing, they're using malt varieties. They're geeking out on yeast, which, that's something you and I are all about. They're doing all the nerdy stuff, but yet they're producing awesome product at the same time. And so, and if they can create something, and I'm going to say this again, and my listeners are probably going to be pissed, but like Andalusia out of Blanco, Texas, they're creating a post oak, mesquite, and applewood smoked whiskey that will rival any Islay Scotch.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, it will, and it's 3 years old, and they put it in new oak, so that's the only thing that they do that's a little bit different. But like, to me, I take that. I mean, of course, I still love some Octomore, and I love all those, funky ones. But like, supporting local craft and Jim Beam, Jack Daniels, they have their place. They're going to be there for 100 years, hopefully without issue. But supporting these local distilleries, these craft distilleries that are doing single malts because they came from a brewing background or whatever. Is going to be, I feel like, the next wave in whiskey. And I don't know how you feel about that.
It is. And I think too that there's room there for that DSS stuff, the hybrid stuff. Absolutely. Right? Like, so experiments that I've done, as a home distiller in the past, things like Stein beer, stone beer, and distilling that, going back to what whiskey originally was in the British Isles. It's actually a little bit of a botanical spirit, and that's not necessary. Botanical spirit's not a bad word anymore. That's the funny thing. Even 3 or 4 years ago it was. Now it's not. You know why? Because people had a whole bunch of time to sit at home and research stuff and read about it, and they're like, oh, I wonder what that tastes like.
Yeah.
But the oak thing's the other factor. There's 2 oak blights. One is now definitely for sure in the area in the Midwest where most of our white oak is grown. The other one's coming. So we're going to have problems with oak availability. We already have, as a craft distiller, we already have major problems with oak availability, especially quality air seasoned oak. I went from guaranteed 24-month-old air seasoned barrels for $215 a piece just a couple of years ago to we can't guarantee anything past 18 months, and you're going to pay close to $400 a barrel for it.
Oh, Lord.
Right. And I'm getting a better deal than a lot of people. You get out your direction or you get out towards California, people bringing in white oak, they're going to pay, almost $800, $900, $1,200 for it by the time it gets to them.
You're right.
So there's that. And then the other funny thing is you think about the profile of bourbon. It's primarily a corn whiskey, right? Most of it is, produced in Kentucky and or at MGP. Let's just be honest. We'll put them in there. That statistic about 90% of the world's bourbon was bullshit when it was said in the 90s, and it's still bullshit today.
Yep.
100%. Basically you have 3 mash bills that pretty much everyone uses. If you're in Kentucky and you're one of the big guys, you're basically using the same Charles Everett Beam yeast strain that all the other guys except for Wild Turkey are using. And if the story is true about Jimmy collecting yeast from the wild out there at the distillery, that was probably also the Charles Everett Beam strain, because it'd be the most common strain in Kentucky.
Yeah, just hybridized a little bit.
Yeah. And then you go into new American oak with a standard 3 or 4 char. And what do you get? Okay, so you got a corn whiskey. Corn is already sweet. It's yellow number 2 dent, so it's not doing anything weird for the most part. It's already a sweet profile. You throw it into a sweet barrel, and then you hear everybody rave on about the caramels and the vanillas and the butterscotch. Well, great. Do you also pour sugar into your frosted flakes? Do you eat frosted flakes because you like corn?
Yeah. Yeah.
Pretty boring, man.
Yeah.
Just give me 15 creamers and 5 packs of sugar with my coffee, right?
Yep.
I don't want my coffee to taste like coffee. I don't want my corn whiskey to taste like corn. See, now I'm going to get the hate mail, and I'm okay with it. I thrive on it.
You won't, because it's true. Like I try to tell people all the time that especially in the bourbon realm. Now, when you get to single malt and stuff like that, it does get different, and even rye whiskey, if it's not all MGP 95.5. But bourbon, the bandwidth on bourbon is so small. You're going to get a 10 to 15% differential per distillery, whatever.
Right.
Whereas Scotch, I mean, good Lord, it can go, or single malt, it can go a lot broader because of the things they're doing to it, the amount, what they're doing to the malt, and what they're doing, post distillation and stuff like that. So, yeah, I don't know.
I feel like with bourbon, that's my problem too. Is like, I feel like I already kicked the ball way over there.
Yeah.
And it's at the fence. I don't see anything else necessarily, not anything, because there's going to be things I find, don't get me wrong. I don't see anywhere else that ball can go that's going to be interesting, good, or different enough to be something that's going to attract my attention for very long.
Right.
Is what I would say.
Right.
So.
And that's why Jim Beam just came out with their Claremont whiskey, which is a single malt, and that's why everybody's experimenting with different oaks, and I Amberana finished this, or I did this, or I did that. And I'm like, Amberana has its place. I get it. It's a great wood for limited usage. I get it. If you like Cinnamon Toast Crunch, it's a great wood to use. Yep. But at the same time, it's like not everything has to be finished in it, so
no. And that's the other part of it too. Like and I think you and I've talked to Amberana in the past. It can go deer urine real quick. Yes. Now, the cool thing about it is you can use it a million freaking times, and as it goes, it gets a little bit better. But people were traditionally that was used as a cachaça, not even an aging wood. It was used as an infusion wood. Right. So why aren't people using it the right way? And what I mean by the right way, it's not a right way. It's preference. It's preferential. So if you want to use an Amberana barrel, go for it. I'm not going to do it. We have some Amberana influence stuff, but that's all it is. It's influenced, because what we do is we use the cubes and or the chips.
Okay.
I've got a rye whiskey right now that's a tribute to my buddy Mike Stallings, who passed away, that I'm hoping to get out in the near future. And what we did is we took a 5-year-old Solomon Scott rye, we dumped it into a stainless steel barrel, we put some Amberana chips on it for a couple weeks. The Amberana went fairly strong on it. I pulled it out. I put it back into a charred number 2 New American Oak barrel to pull that Amberana back a little bit and let the rye come back to the forefront. But more importantly, why don't you see it with other spirits, for example? So I've got some barrel aged absinthe. We take absinthe and put it in a New American Oak barrel and put it out as at a 106 or 108 proof. I can't remember, more as a after dinner whiskey alternative. But I took some of that out of the barrels and put it into stainless steel and put some Amberana on it, just enough to give a little bit of Amberana to it. For clear spirits, man, home distillers should be playing with that shit like crazy, especially if you're playing with weird grains and stuff. Throw some Amberana on it for a day or 2 at most and pull it off, just enough to give a little of that characteristic. So, but yeah, I mean, and I don't mean any offense to the Hubers in particular, because the later cigar batches after the barrels got some wear on them, they're pretty good. But that first cigar batch that they did, man, and they know this, I can't do, dude.
Yeah.
That better be the only thing you're drinking or the last thing you drink, as Justin said on a recent podcast.
Yeah.
And you're going to wake up and taste it the next morning. You're going to be like, what the hell is that?
Yep. Yeah. Well, before we go, because we ran a little over, and that's okay, because we're having good conversation. What do you see not only in your future, because I see, and this is just me prophesying as a shaman. I'm sorry, that's stupid. I see your future going, going in big ways, because I see your YouTube channel blowing up and stuff like that. But how do you see Spirits of French Lick in the next 6 months to a year, and how do you see your private projects going? How do you see all that working out?
Not great at that sort of thing. So, but Spirits of French Lick again is at that middle-sized distillery range, right? And the truth of the matter is it'll either sink or it'll swim, but it's got to do one of the two.
Right.
And it's got to make up its mind what it wants to do. It has a great chance of doing really, really, really cool stuff. We have a great chance of doing really, really cool stuff. And it's got a fantastic foundation to launch off of to do those things. It just, as an organization, has to figure out how to capitalize on that and to make it work. Right. And I think that will get figured out. I think that we did really, really well going into COVID, because at the time we had a great team. It was myself, Jolie Kasperzak, and Sean White, plus the owners. And the owners were smart enough to know what my strengths were, smart enough to know what Sean's strengths were, and smart enough to know what Jolie's strengths were. And Sean obviously became a casualty because of COVID. Didn't die from COVID, but his job became a casualty because can't go out and do anything.
Right.
Jolie left, which kind of left me in the midst of launching all that. But we were prepared for the pandemic because we were already doing so many things online, right? That gave us this huge head start above a bunch of the other craft distilleries, including the fact that I already had platforms to advertise on, etc. So now coming back out of that COVID world, got to get some boots on the ground and get people out there and start pushing stuff. So, and I say all these things to you because, if they listen to it, they know how I feel about that. Absolutely. And they have to know within themselves that that's the absolute truth. As far as for myself, so obviously going to keep hammering away at, One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute. If you have Ghost, You Have Everything podcast that you were on, because I love doing that stuff. Keep hammering away at hopefully one of these days seeing some form of legalization for home distillation, because if you want, the only thing we make in the United States anymore is whiskey or distilled spirits, and you want a next generation of distillers that knows what they're doing. Sorry, college grads from wherever you're coming from with your chemistry degree, but you don't know what the hell you're doing when you get in a distillery 99% of the time, and you're full of shit the other 1% of the time. And I don't mean that offensively. I've only met one of those guys, and that's Jerry Dalton, that knew what he was doing.
Right.
And he had some help there, obviously, from the beams, etc.
Right.
But if you really want to encourage people to get into this line of business, then you got to give them a way to learn. And the way to learn is to learn it the hard way at home. So I'll keep working on that. As far as professionally, obviously, I always joke. It's like the Lion in the Dark Knight with the Joker. I'm like a dog chasing cars. I wouldn't know what to do with it if I caught it. I just do stuff.
Yeah.
I just do stuff, and I will continue to just do stuff no matter what I do. And hopefully those things will continue to be at least moderately successful enough to keep me in a paycheck, and keep the attention on it. I've had a lot of great opportunities in the past few years that have been offered to me from big distilleries, and I've passed on all of them. One, because I have a big mouth, and two, because I don't want to play for a major league team.
Right.
I don't see it as being fun. I don't see it as being passionate. Yeah, it's a lot of money to stand there and monitor things or push buttons and make the same 3 mash bills. I don't want to do it. I'm a craft distilling guy. I'm a pot still guy. More than pot still, I'm a batch still guy.
Oh,
that's, give me pot stills or give me a million modifications to pot stills, and I'm happy. I can do cool stuff with that.
Right.
So that's my playground, and that's what I'll continue to do. So
that's awesome. And you're also, I noticed on one of the last, If You Have Ghosts, you're really into music, and you and I have very similar musical tastes. 9 Inch Nails, Typo Negative, stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
So it's really interesting. And in the last one you recently did, you were actually playing music in the background, and I thought that was really cool. Is that something you want to maybe not put out to the public, but is that something you want to work on more in the future? As you can see, I got my little guitar sitting over here in the corner. I'm a picker, but I don't pick it up as much as I should, but I started out playing bass in high school, and this, we were too busy banging heads and smoking weed. So, it was like, it didn't never went anywhere, but I've always been musically driven. And I think that's really cool that you can kind of put that into the distilling side as well. So is that something you want to maybe see move forward a little bit?
Yeah, I in a different life, somewhere between the ages of 16 and 22, there was a time there where I was kind of a semi-professional musician for a while, and I did enjoy music until I got burnt out on it because of it doesn't matter, but
It's fine.
certain person kind of burnt me out on that. And I didn't play for years until Mike Stallings kind of inspired me to start doing it again. And so I'm gonna keep playing with like doing like a original little pieces for like If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything, because that was a lot of fun. I actually recorded a couple more of those the other night.
It's awesome. It's awesome.
They're weird, and they're clunky, and you can hear, like, I didn't trim my guitar strings, and I don't want to. I would like all the little sound artifacts. I think it's awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna keep doing that, and I think it works well in like a format for If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. I have toyed around with the idea. I have a friend who's he runs a podcast called The Metal Forge. I grew up with him, Mark Jackson. He and I were in several different bands, and he's in a fairly prominent heavy band in Louisville called Overload, and they've toured several different places. But he has a friend who owns a record label that presses records, like actual vinyls. And we're toying around with the idea of even doing like some limited edition, like If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything vinyls, where it might be like a 45 with a story with one song backing on one side and a story on the other with another song backing, or maybe even bringing in other musicians to do some of those as well. And then they don't ever get released digitally. Like, and maybe there's only 15 copies made. I don't know. It doesn't matter. It's just fun. It's an outlet. Absolutely. It's anywhere where distillation, history, agriculture, music, and spirituality come together. That's my place. So
I knew that one was coming. And that's where we share a lot of similarities in that, is that like distilling and all of that and whiskey making and stuff is a very spiritual endeavor. And you put that to the forefront, and you make sure that it's like done in a way that's not only, like you say, representative of you, but representative of the spirit and spirits of French. Like, you're representing a particular person, like the Lee Sinclair and all that. You're representing that person, and you want to do it justice. And so that I really applaud you for that, because that's pretty cool.
Well, that's the sacred and profane part of it. So here's the sacred and profane and the rub that comes with it. So the sacred's the easy part. That's the part we just talked about, those things that we're really into. This is all alchemy for me. It's all spiritual. It's all jokingly tongue-in-cheek necromancy, bringing back stories from the past, people that, nobody in New Orleans had ever heard of Maddie Gladden until we put her on a bottle, and now they all know the story. The profane is that you can take it way too seriously, like a lot of these guys do, and not realize that we're not curing cancer. We're making fucking whiskey. It's supposed to be fun. Yeah. So
absolutely.
Absolutely. That's the sacred and profane. So
tell Kim we're done. So
will do.
But yeah, no, I really appreciate you coming on here. And if you'll stick on for a second, I want to talk to you about a couple of things. But yeah, I really appreciate everybody listening. And why don't you tell everybody all your links and stuff like that, so they can find you, and I'll try and put them in the description below as well.
I got to put on the radio voice first. Hold
on. Oh, please do.
All right. So you can check me out at thealchemistcabinet.com. I'm also on social media. I don't know any of my social media usernames because I'm the most unprofessional distiller in the world. You can also check me out at spiritsofFrenchlick.com. If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything podcast, wherever you get your podcast. Distillers Talk podcast, wherever you get your podcast. One Piece at a Time, Sacred and Profane podcast on Spotify, and the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute on YouTube.
That's a lot. That's a lot, bro. You need to.
It really is.
No wonder you're drinking coffee. You need to stay awake. Shit.
I need like a button on my soundboard where I can just record that, and then just every time somebody asks,
absolutely,
there it is.
All right, guys. Well, until next time, keep your spirits up.